rain fell gently against the stone streets of ancient Rome, soft and persistent, like a whisper that refused to be ignored. The sky was gray, the air cool, and the city seemed quieter than usual. In a narrow alley not far from the bustling forum, a young man named Lucius leaned against a wall, clutching his arm, his face twisted with discomfort, and his eyes burned with frustration. He had been injured earlier that morning during training, a simple mistake, a moment's distraction. The wooden practice sword of his opponent had struck his forearm with enough force to leave a deep bruise and swelling pain that now pulsed with every heartbeat. To most, it would have been a small injury, but to Lucius it felt like an injustice. His mind churned with anger, embarrassment, and self-pity. "Why does this always happen to me?" he muttered. "Why must pain follow me everywhere?" He kicked a loose stone across the alley, wincing as the movement stirred the ache in his arm. He was tired of discomfort, tired of hardship, tired of feeling as though life was always testing him, always pushing him down when he tried to stand tall. As he stood there brooding, the sound of slow footsteps echoed from the far end of the alley. An older man approached, wrapped in a simple cloak. His beard was short and gray, his expression calm, and his eyes carried a quiet depth that made it seem as though he saw more than the world around him. It was Marcus, a teacher known in the city for his strange but compelling ideas about life, suffering, and the mind. Marcus paused when he noticed Lucius. "You look as though the gods themselves have wronged you," he said gently. Lucius sighed. "It feels that way." Marcus tilted his head slightly. "What has happened?" Lucius lifted his arm. "Training accident, nothing serious, they say, but it hurts. And it always seems to be me. Others move through life easily, but he hesitated, searching for the right word. "I feel cursed by pain." Marcus studied him for a moment. Then he smiled faintly. "Come," he said, "walk with me." They began moving slowly down the alley, the rain forming tiny ripples in the puddles beneath their feet. "Tell me," Marcus said, "what exactly is hurting you right now?" Lucius frowned. "My arm, obviously." Marcus nodded. "Yes, but is it only your arm?" Lucius hesitated. "What do you mean?" Marcus gestured toward his chest. "Is the pain only here, in the flesh, or is it also here, in the mind?" Lucius thought about it. The throbbing in his arm was real, undeniable. But so was the anger, the embarrassment, the sense of unfairness, I suppose. "Both," he admitted. Marcus nodded again. "Good, then we must separate them." They stopped beneath a small archway where the rain could not reach them. Marcus pointed to Lucius's arm. "This pain in your arm, what is it, really?" Lucius looked down. "A bruise, swelling, nerves, reacting to the injury." "Exactly," Marcus said. "It is a physical sensation, a signal from your body. It says, something has happened, be careful, rest, heal." Lucius nodded slowly. "But the other pain," Marcus continued, "the anger, the self-pity, the feeling of injustice, where does that come from?" Lucius was silent. Marcus answered for him. "It comes from your judgment." "My judgment?" "Yes," Marcus said. "You are not only feeling the bruise, you are telling yourself a story about it. You are saying, this should not have happened. This always happens to me. Others have it easier. Life is unfair." Lucius felt a strange discomfort, not in his arm, but in his chest. The words felt uncomfortably true. Marcus leaned against the wall. "Tell me, if the same injury had happened to a soldier in battle, would he say the same things?" Lucius shook his head. "No, he would be grateful it wasn't worse. And if it had happened to a child, playing in the street, he might cry," Lucius said, "but forget about it in an hour." Marcus smiled. "So the pain itself is not the whole story. The meaning you give it, that is what shapes your suffering." Lucius frowned, trying to understand. "Are you saying the pain isn't real?" Marcus shook his head. "No, the pain is real, but suffering is something else." He paused, letting the words settle. "Pain is what the body feels," he continued. "Suffering is what the mind creates." Lucius looked at his arm again. The throbbing hadn't changed, but something about it felt quieter. Marcus stepped back into the rain and motioned for Lucius to follow. They walked toward the forum, where merchants were setting up stalls and citizens hurried beneath cloaks and umbrellas. "Have you ever seen a dog with an injured leg?" Marcus asked. Lucius nodded. Yes, what does it do? It limps, rests. Sometimes it whimpers. And does it curse the gods? Does it complain about its bad luck? Does it compare itself to other dogs? Lucius almost laughed. No, of course not. Marcus spread his hands. It feels pain, but it does not suffer in the way humans do, because it does not create stories about its pain. Lucius's steps slowed. You mean, I'm making it worse myself? Marcus gave a small, knowing smile. Most of us do. They reached the edge of the forum, where the marble columns rose tall and white against the gray sky. Marcus turned to face him. Pain is a teacher, he said, but most people treat it as an enemy. They fight it, curse it, run from it, and in doing so, they multiply it. Lucius shifted his weight, uncomfortable. How can pain be a teacher? Marcus pointed toward a blacksmith's stall. Inside, a man hammered glowing metal against an anvil. Sparks flew into the air with each strike. Look there, Marcus said. What is the blacksmith doing? Forging a sword, Lucius replied. And how does he shape the metal? With heat, with force. Marcus nodded. Without the fire and the hammer, the metal would remain a shapeless lump. It is pain that gives it form, strength, purpose. Lucius watched the blacksmith for a moment, the rhythmic clang of metal echoing in his ears. Are you saying pain makes us stronger? He asked. Sometimes, Marcus said, but not automatically, only if we respond to it wisely. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Pain is not the problem. Our fear of pain is the problem. Our resistance to it, our belief that it should not exist. Lucius felt a quiet tension in his chest. He had spent so much of his life trying to avoid discomfort, seeking ease and pleasure whenever possible. What if pain is unavoidable? Marcus continued. What if it is part of being human? What if it is not a curse but a test? Lucius looked down at his arm again. The swelling was still there. The ache remained, but the anger, it seemed less sharp. Marcus placed a hand gently on his shoulder. The Stoics say this, it is not things that disturb us, but our judgments about them. Lucius repeated the words quietly. Our judgments. Yes, Marcus said. Your arm is injured, that is a fact. But the belief that this injury is unbearable, unfair, or catastrophic, that is your judgment. And that is what causes your suffering. Lucius felt as though a veil had been lifted from his eyes. So, if I change my judgment, the suffering changes. Marcus nodded. Exactly, he gestured toward the busy forum. Every person here carries pain, loss, illness, disappointment, fear. But some walk with calm while others are crushed. The difference is not always the pain itself. It is the way they think about it. Lucius watched the crowd. An old woman walked slowly with a cane, her back bent. A merchant argued loudly with a customer. A child laughed as he chased a stray dog through the square. Life, in all its forms, moved around him. For most people, Marcus said, pain is something to escape at all costs. But the Stoic learns to face it, to understand it, to use it. Lucius took a deep breath. The air felt cool and sharp in his lungs. And how do I start? He asked. Marcus smiled. By telling yourself the truth. Not the dramatic story your mind invents. Not the complaints or fears. Just the simple truth. He pointed again to Lucius's arm. Say it. Lucius hesitated. Then he spoke slowly. My arm is bruised. It hurts, but it will heal. Marcus nodded. Again, Lucius repeated it. This time, the words felt more solid, more real. My arm is bruised. It hurts, but it will heal. The anger that had filled him earlier seemed almost foolish now, like a storm that had passed. Marcus stepped back. That is the beginning of wisdom, he said, to see things as they are, not worse, not better, just as they are. Lucius felt something shift inside him. The pain was still there, but it no longer felt like an enemy. It was just a sensation, a signal, something temporary. For the first time that day, he felt calm. Marcus turned and began to walk away. Where are you going? Lucius asked. To my usual bench near the temple, Marcus replied. If you wish to learn more about pain, come find me tomorrow. Lucius watched him disappear into the crowd. The rain had stopped. The sky was beginning to clear. A faint ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a soft glow across the forum. Lucius flexed his arm gently. It still hurt, but he no longer cursed it. Instead, he whispered quietly to himself, "It is only pain, not suffering," and for the first time, he believed it. The next morning, the city awoke beneath a pale golden sky. The rain of the previous day had washed the dust from the streets, and the air felt clean, almost new. Merchants opened their stalls, bakers filled the air with the scent of warm bread, and the distant sound of chariots echoed through the stone roads. Lucius walked slowly through the forum, his injured arm resting against his side. The bruise had darkened overnight, a deep purple shadow beneath the skin. It still hurt when he moved it, but something inside him felt different. Yesterday the pain had felt like an insult. Today it felt like a message. He spotted Marcus sitting on a stone bench near the temple, exactly where he had said he would be. The old philosopher was watching the morning crowd with quiet interest, as though every person was part of a story only he could see. Lucius approached him. "You came," Marcus said without turning his head. Lucius smiled faintly. "You said to find you if I wanted to learn more about pain." Marcus finally looked at him. "And do you?" Lucius hesitated. "I think so. Yesterday, what you said, it changed something, but I still don't understand everything." Marcus nodded. "Good understanding does not come all at once. It comes in steps, like walking up a long hill." Lucius sat beside him. For a moment, they watched the crowd in silence. A young boy ran past, chasing a wooden hoop. A woman scolded him, but there was laughter in her voice. A soldier limped slowly across the square, his face stern but calm. Marcus pointed subtly toward the soldier. "What do you see?" "A wounded man," Lucius said. "He's injured." Marcus nodded. "Yes, but look closer." "What else do you see?" Lucius studied the soldier's face. There was no bitterness there, no visible anger, just quiet determination. "He doesn't seem upset," Lucius admitted. "Exactly," Marcus said. "His body carries pain, but his mind does not seem to carry suffering." Lucius leaned forward. "How is that possible? Surely he wishes he wasn't injured." Marcus smiled faintly. "Of course, but he understands something important, something most people refuse to accept." "And what is that?" Marcus turned to him. "That pain is not an accident of life. It is part of it." Lucius frowned. "But why would that be? Why would the world be made that way?" Marcus gestured toward a tree growing beside the temple. Its trunk was thick and twisted, its bark rough and scarred. "Look at that tree," he said. "Do you think it grew strong in perfect conditions, with no storms, no wind, no harsh sun?" Lucius shook his head. "Probably not." Marcus nodded. "It is the storms that force its roots deeper, the wind that strengthens its trunk. Without resistance, it would be weak, fragile, easy to break." Lucius looked at the tree again. He had passed it countless times, but he had never really seen it. "So you're saying pain is like the storm?" he asked. "Yes," Marcus said. "Pain is resistance, and resistance is what shapes us." Lucius was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "But what about unnecessary pain? Accidents, illness, loss? Those don't seem like lessons, they just seem cruel." Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he picked up a small pebble from the ground and rolled it between his fingers. "Tell me, Lucius," he said, "have you ever trained with a sword?" Lucius nodded. "Since I was a boy." "And was the training comfortable?" Lucius almost laughed. "No, it was exhausting, painful. Even did you ever leave a session without bruises or sore muscles?" "Rarely," Marcus nodded. "So why did you keep training?" Lucius shrugged. "To become stronger, faster, better." Marcus looked at him knowingly. "So you accepted that pain was necessary for growth?" Lucius opened his mouth to respond, but then paused. The logic was undeniable. "But that's different," he said. "Training has a purpose. It's controlled. Life's pain isn't." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure about that?" Lucius hesitated. Marcus continued. "The Stoics believe that life itself is a kind of training. Every hardship, every discomforted is all part of a greater exercise. Not one you chose, perhaps, but one that shapes your character." Lucius leaned back against the bench, absorbing the words. Character, he repeated. Yes, Marcus said. Courage, patience, discipline, wisdom, these things do not grow in comfort, they grow in difficulty. He pointed again to the soldier crossing the square. That man did not learn endurance in a warm bed. He learned it in the cold, in hunger, in fear, in wounds, and now, because of those experiences, he carries himself with strength. Lucius thought about his own life. He had always sought the easy path when possible, avoiding discomfort, complaining when things became difficult. What if someone never faces pain? He asked. Marcus smiled. Then they remain untested, and untested strength is no strength at all. Lucius felt a strange unease, but pain still feels unpleasant. Surely we're meant to avoid it. Marcus nodded. We are meant to avoid unnecessary harm, but we are not meant to expect a painless life. That expectation is what creates misery. He leaned forward slightly. Imagine two men walking in the rain. One curses the sky, complains about the wet streets, and wishes he was somewhere else. The other accepts the rain, adjusts his cloak, and continues walking. Lucius nodded. Both are equally wet, Marcus said, but only one is miserable. Lucius smiled faintly. Because of his attitude, exactly. Marcus's voice softened. Pain is like the rain. Sometimes it comes whether you want it or not, but your reaction that is within your control. Lucius flexed his injured arm. The ache was still there, but it no longer felt like a personal attack. What about emotional pain? He asked quietly. Loss, betrayal, fear. Can those be useful too? Marcus's expression grew more serious. Those are the deepest teachers of all. Lucius swallowed. How Marcus took a slow breath. When you lose something you love, you learn what truly matters. When you are betrayed, you learn the nature of trust. When you are afraid, you discover your courage. He paused. Without emotional pain, the soul remains shallow, like a pool that has never known a storm. Lucius looked down at his hands. I've spent most of my life trying to avoid pain, he admitted. Physical and emotional. I thought that was the smart thing to do. Marcus nodded. Most people think that, but in doing so, they also avoid growth. He placed the pebble back on the ground. The Stoics do not seek pain, he said, but they do not fear it either. They see it as part of the training of life. Lucius sat quietly, letting the idea settle in his mind. So pain isn't something to hate, he said slowly. It's something to learn from. Marcus smiled. Now you're beginning to understand. A group of children ran past them laughing loudly. One of them tripped and fell onto the stone pavement. For a moment, he cried, but within seconds, he stood up, brushed off the dust, and ran after his friends again. Marcus nodded toward the boy. There is a lesson there too. Lucius watched him. He didn't stay down for long. No, Marcus said, because he did not build a story around the pain. He felt it, reacted, and moved on. Lucius exhaled slowly. I see now. The pain itself is simple. It's the thoughts around it that complicate everything. Marcus nodded. Exactly. He stood up from the bench. Come, he said. Walk with me. They moved through the forum, weaving between merchants and shoppers. Today, Marcus said, I want you to practice something. Lucius looked at him curiously. Whenever you feel discomfort, physical or emotional, I want you to pause, just for a moment, and ask yourself a simple question. What question? Marcus stopped and turned to face him. What can this teach me? Lucius repeated the words softly. What can this teach me? Marcus nodded. If you ask that question honestly, pain becomes a guide instead of an enemy. Lucius felt a quiet determination rise inside him. And if there's no lesson, he asked. Marcus smiled. There is always a lesson. Sometimes the lesson is patience, sometimes endurance, sometimes humility. He placed a hand gently on Lucius's shoulder. But you will never see the lesson if you spend all your time complaining about the pain. Lucius nodded. I understand. Marcus stepped back. Good, because the next lesson will be harder. Lucius frowned. Harder. Marcus's expression grew thoughtful. Yes, physical pain is the easiest to understand. Emotional pain, that is where most people lose themselves. Lucius felt a faint knot form in his stomach. What do you mean? Marcus began walking again. Tomorrow, he said, I will show you how the Stoics faced grief, betrayal, and fear, and why those pains shaped the strongest souls. Lucius followed him, his mind full of questions. The sun rose higher above the rooftops, casting warm light across the forum. The city felt alive, vibrant, and full of motion, and for the first time Lucius began to wonder if pain, rather than being his enemy, might be the very thing that would shape the man he was meant to become. The sun had barely risen when Lucius stepped into the quiet streets of Rome. The air was still cool from the night, and a thin mist clung to the stone roads like a fading dream. Shopkeepers were only beginning to open their doors, and the usual noise of the city had not yet awakened. But inside Lucius's mind, there was no silence. Marcus's words from the previous day echoed again and again. Emotional pain. That is where most people lose themselves. Lucius had spent the night thinking about that sentence. Physical pain, he was beginning to understand. It was simple, direct, honest. A bruise hurt, a cut stung, a broken bone ached. But emotional pain was different. It lingered. It changed shape. It crept into thoughts and memories, turning small things into heavy burdens. And as he walked through the quiet streets, something long buried inside him began to surface. A memory. A voice, a face. His younger brother, Titus. Lucius had not thought about him in years, not deeply, not honestly. The memory was always there, but he kept it hidden. Like a door he refused to open. Titus had been lively, curious, always asking questions. He laughed easily, ran fast, and followed Lucius everywhere. But 3 winters ago, a sickness had spread through their neighborhood. Fever, coughing, weakness. It took many lives. Titus had been one of them. Lucius remembered the small bed, the pale face, the way his brother's hand had grown colder in his own. He remembered the helplessness, the anger, the crushing weight in his chest, and after the funeral, he had made a silent decision. Never feel that pain again, so he buried it. Avoided deep attachments, avoided strong emotions, kept everything light, distant, controlled. But now, as he walked through the mist, the memory rose like a tide he could not stop. By the time he reached the temple bench, his chest felt heavy. Marcus was already there, as always. Calm/still, watching the world with quiet attention. You look troubled, he said. Lucius sat down slowly. You said yesterday that emotional pain is the hardest kind. Marcus nodded. Yes, Lucius swallowed. I think I've been carrying some. Marcus didn't respond right away. He simply waited. After a long silence, Lucius spoke again. My brother died 3 years ago, he said quietly. A sickness. There was nothing we could do. Marcus's eyes softened, but his expression remained calm. I'm sorry, he said. Lucius stared at the ground. After that, I decided I would never let myself feel that way again. I stopped caring too much about people. To stop getting close. I thought it would protect me. Marcus nodded slowly. And did it? Lucius hesitated. It protected me from grief, but it also made everything feel empty. Marcus leaned back against the bench. That is the price of running from emotional pain, he said. You don't just avoid sorrow, you also avoid joy. Lucius felt a tightness in his throat. I thought I was being strong, he said, but maybe I was just hiding. Marcus looked at him. Most people confuse avoidance with strength, he said, but true strength is the ability to face pain without being destroyed by it. Lucius took a deep breath. But how? He asked. How can someone lose someone they love and not be destroyed? Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. The Stoics never said you should not feel grief. He said they were not made of stone. They loved, they lost, they mourned. Lucius looked up. Then what was different about them? Marcus's voice was steady. They understood the nature of life, and because of that, they were not surprised by loss. Lucius frowned. Not surprised. How can anyone not be surprised by death? Marcus pointed toward the marketplace, where an old man was slowly setting up his stall. That man, Marcus said, do you think he believes he will live forever? Lucius shook his head. Of course not. Do you think he knows, deep down, that one day he will die? Yes, Marcus nodded. And yet, when death comes to him or someone he loves, he will still feel shocked. It still feels as though something unnatural has happened. Lucius was silent. Marcus continued. The Stoics trained themselves to remember a simple truth. Everything we love is temporary. Lucius felt a sharp ache in his chest. That sounds cold, he said. Marcus shook his head gently. It is not cold. It is honest. He leaned forward slightly. When you hold a cup made of clay, you know it can break. When it does, you are not surprised. You may be disappointed, but not shocked. Lucius nodded slowly. Marcus's eyes softened. The Stoic said, when you kiss your child, remind yourself that they are mortal, not to make the moment sad but to make it more precious. Lucius felt his throat tighten, so instead of pretending loss won't happen, he said, they accepted it in advance. Yes, Marcus said. They loved fully, but they loved with awareness, not illusion. Lucius looked down at his hands. I never thought about it that way, he said. When Titus died, it felt like the world had broken some rule, like something had gone terribly wrong. Marcus nodded. That is how most people feel, because they live as if life owes them permanence, as if the people they love are guaranteed to stay. He paused, but life makes no such promises. Lucius swallowed hard. So what should I have done? He asked. You accepted his death. Marcus shook his head. You should have grieved. That is natural. That is human. But you should not have turned your grief into bitterness or fear of love itself. Lucius felt the truth of those words like a quiet blow. I stopped loving deeply, he admitted, because I was afraid of losing again. Marcus nodded, and in doing so, you began losing even before anything was taken from you. Lucius closed his eyes. The weight in his chest felt heavy but also strangely clear. So what do I do now? He asked. Marcus was silent for a moment. First he said, you must accept that pain is the price of love. Lucius opened his eyes. If you love deeply, you will one day grieve deeply. That is the cost. There is no way around it. Lucius nodded slowly. And second, Marcus continued, you must remember that grief is not an enemy. It is a reflection of love. Lucius felt tears sting the corners of his eyes. So feeling that pain doesn't mean I'm weak. Marcus smiled gently. No, it means you cared. They sat in silence for a while. The sun rose higher, burning away the morning mist. The city began to wake, filling with voices and movement. Lucius spoke again. I've been afraid of emotional pain my whole life, he said. But maybe that fear has been controlling me. Marcus nodded. Fear of pain is often more damaging than pain itself. He looked at Lucius. Think about it. How many choices have you made just to avoid discomfort? How many opportunities have you ignored? How many relationships have you kept at a distance? Lucius thought about it. The answer was uncomfortable. Many, he admitted. Marcus placed his hands on his knees. The Stoics believed that fear, grief, anger, these emotions are not the enemy. The enemy is being ruled by them. Lucius nodded. So the goal isn't to feel nothing. No, Marcus said. The goal is to feel without losing your reason. He stood up from the bench. Come, he said. Walk with me. They moved through the temple courtyard. The sun warmed the marble floors, and birds fluttered between the columns. Marcus stopped near a small fountain. Tell me about your brother, he said. Lucius hesitated. He hadn't spoken about Titus in years. But then he began. He loved figs, Lucius said. He would sneak into the kitchen and steal them. My mother pretended to be angry, but she always laughed. Marcus smiled faintly. He sounds like a joyful child. He was, Lucius said. He followed me everywhere, even when I didn't want him to. He paused, then added softly, I miss him. Marcus nodded. That feeling, he said, is not your enemy. It is proof that your brother's life mattered. Lucius felt tears roll down his cheeks. But this time he didn't try to stop them. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel the grief fully. And strangely, it didn't feel like it was destroying him. It felt honest. Marcus watched him quietly. Pain does not always break us, he said. Sometimes, it opens us. Lucius wiped his eyes. I think I understand now, he said. Emotional pain isn't something to run from. It's something to face with wisdom. Marcus nodded, and with time, he added, it becomes less like a wound and more like a scar, a reminder of what you've lived through. Lucius looked at the fountain, the sunlight dancing on the water's surface for the first time since his brother's death. The memory of Titus didn't feel like a dark shadow. It felt like a quiet light. "Thank you," he said softly. Marcus smiled. "This is only the beginning," he said. "There is one more truth about pain you must learn." Lucius looked at him. "What is it?" Marcus's expression grew more serious. "The greatest pain most people experience is not from the world, but from their own thoughts." Lucius frowned. "My thoughts?" Marcus nodded. "Tomorrow, I will show you how the mind creates suffering and how the Stoics learn to free themselves from it." Lucius took a deep breath. The journey was harder than he expected, but for the first time, he felt ready to continue. That night, Lucius could not sleep. The memory of his brother had stirred something deep within him, something he had kept locked away for years. But unlike before, the grief did not feel like a suffocating darkness. It felt like a quiet presence, sad but also warm, like a distant memory of sunlight still. Marcus's final words echoed in his mind. The greatest pain most people experience is not from the world, but from their own thoughts. Lucius lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling. How can thoughts cause more pain than reality itself? He wondered. The question followed him into sleep, and it was still there when he woke up the next morning. He found Marcus, as usual, on the stone bench near the temple. The old philosopher seemed unchanged, as if time itself moved more slowly around him. "You look like a man with too many thoughts," Marcus said. Lucius sat down. "You were right. I couldn't stop thinking about what you said yesterday." Marcus smiled faintly. "Good, that means the lesson has already begun." Lucius leaned forward. "You said most of our pain comes from our thoughts. But how can that be true? If someone insults me, that hurts. If I lose money, that hurts. If I get sick, that hurts. Those are real things." Marcus nodded. "Yes, they are real events, but the suffering they cause depends on what you tell yourself about them." Lucius frowned. "I still don't understand." Marcus pointed toward the edge of the forum, where two men were arguing loudly. Their voices rose above the crowd. "What do you see?" he asked. "A quarrel," Lucius said. "They're angry at each other." Marcus nodded. "And what is causing their anger?" Lucius watched them closely. One of the men was shouting red-faced, while the other stood stiffly, his jaw clenched. "It looks like an insult," Lucius said. Marcus smiled. "Yes, one man has insulted the other. But tell me, does an insult have power on its own?" Lucius hesitated. "What do you mean?" Marcus picked up a dry leaf from the ground and held it up. "If I throw this leaf at you, will it hurt you?" Lucius shook his head. "Of course not." Marcus let the leaf fall. Words are often like that leaf. Light, harmless. But when someone believes the words, when they accept them as truth, that is when they become painful. Lucius considered this. "So the insult hurts because the man believes it." "Exactly," Marcus said. "If someone calls you a fool, the pain comes from your judgment. What if they're right? What if others think the same?" Lucius nodded slowly. "But if you are certain in your character," Marcus continued, "then the insult becomes nothing more than noise, like a leaf brushing against your shoulder." Lucius looked back at the arguing men. Suddenly their shouting seemed less important. "So the pain isn't in the words," he said. "It's in the thoughts that follow." Marcus nodded. "You're beginning to see?" He leaned back on the bench. "The Stoics believe that between every event and our reaction, there is a space, and in that space, we choose our judgment." Lucius frowned. "But sometimes the reaction feels automatic." "That is because you have practiced the wrong reactions for years," Marcus said. "The mind, like the body, follows habits." Lucius thought about it. When someone criticized him, he immediately felt defensive. When something went wrong, he instantly assumed the worst. "These reactions feel natural," he said. Marcus shook his head. "They feel familiar, not natural. There is a difference." Lucius raised an eyebrow. Marcus continued. "A soldier who has trained for years reacts instantly to danger, but his reaction is not natural, it is trained." Lucius nodded. "So you're saying my thoughts are trained to—" "Yes," Marcus said. "Trained by habit, by culture, by fear, by pride. But they can be retrained." Lucius felt a spark of curiosity. "How?" Marcus stood up and gestured for him to follow. They walked through the forum until they reached a quiet corner, where a marble statue stood. It depicted a warrior. Calm and steady, holding a shield. Marcus stopped in front of it. Imagine this, he said. You are walking through the market. A man bumps into you and spills your basket of fruit. Everything falls onto the ground. Lucius nodded. That would be frustrating. Marcus held up a finger. At that moment, two things exist: the event and your judgment. Lucius listened carefully. The event is simple, Marcus said. Fruit has fallen. That is all. But your judgment might say, this is terrible. My day is ruined. That man is an idiot. I am so unlucky. Lucius smiled faintly. That sounds accurate. Marcus continued. But another person might think, the fruit has fallen. That is inconvenient, but it is not the end of the world. Lucius nodded. Marcus spread his hands. Same event. Different judgment. Different suffering. Lucius felt the truth of it. So the Stoic tries to control the judgment, he said. Exactly, Marcus replied, because that is the only part within our control. Lucius leaned against the statue's base. But what about truly bad things? He asked. Illness, loss, poverty. Surely those cause suffering no matter what you think. Marcus's eyes grew serious. They cause pain, he said. But suffering still depends on the mind. He pointed toward a beggar sitting near the edge of the square. The man's clothes were worn, and his face was tired. What he was humming softly, as if lost in a pleasant thought. That man owns almost nothing, Marcus said. Yet he hums. Why? Lucius shrugged. Maybe he's used to it. Or maybe, Marcus said, he has learned not to torture himself with thoughts of what he lacks. Lucius watched the beggar more closely. He did seem peaceful. Marcus turned back to him. The mind has a terrible habit, he said. It adds extra weight to every problem. Lucius frowned. What do you mean? Marcus spoke slowly. If you are sick, the body feels pain. But the mind says, what if I never recover? What if this gets worse? Why is this happening to me? Lucius nodded. If you lose money, Marcus continued, the event is simple. The money is gone. But the mind says, my future is ruined. I'll never succeed. People will think I'm a failure. Lucius sighed. I do that all the time. Marcus smiled gently. Most people do. He placed a hand on Lucius's shoulder. The Stoic practice is simple, but not easy. Remove the extra thoughts. See the event as it is. Lucius took a deep breath. So if something bad happens, I should just describe it plainly. Marcus nodded. Yes, strip it down to its truth. He gestured toward Lucius's arm. Yesterday, your mind said, this always happens to me. Life is unfair. But the truth was simply, my arm is bruised. Lucius smiled slightly. That did make it feel lighter. Marcus nodded. Because you removed the unnecessary suffering. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Lucius asked, what about fear? My thoughts about the future feel impossible to control. Marcus's expression grew thoughtful. Fear, he said, is the mind's favorite weapon. Lucius crossed his arms. Why? Because the future is uncertain, Marcus said, and the mind hates uncertainty. So it fills the unknown with worst-case scenarios. Lucius nodded. That felt painfully familiar. Marcus continued. The Stoics had a practice for this. They called it premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Lucius frowned. That sounds depressing. Marcus chuckled softly. It is not about making yourself miserable. It is about removing fear's power, he explained. You imagine the worst that could reasonably happen. Losing money, being insulted, falling ill. And you ask yourself, could I survive this? Lucius thought about it, and most of the time, Marcus said, the answer is yes. Not comfortably, not but yes. Lucius nodded slowly. So instead of fearing the unknown, he said, you face it in your mind. Exactly, Marcus said, and once you see that you can endure it, the fear loses its grip. Lucius felt a strange sense of relief. I've spent so much time worrying about things that never even happened, he admitted. Marcus smiled. Most suffering exists only in imagination. Lucius looked around the square. People were laughing, talking, trading, living their lives. And the Stoic, Marcus continued, returns to the present moment. because this moment is usually far less painful than the thoughts about the past or future. Lucius took a slow breath. The air felt warm, the sunlight soft on his face. In that moment, there was no grief, no fear, no anger, just the present. I think I understand, he said quietly. The mind creates stories, and those stories create suffering. Marcus nodded, and the Stoic learns to question those stories. Lucius felt a calm clarity settle over him. So pain is real, he said, but suffering is optional. Marcus smiled. Now you sound like a Stoic. Lucius laughed softly. But there is one final lesson, Marcus said, perhaps the most important of all. Lucius looked at him. What is it? Marcus's expression grew calm and serious at the same time. How to turn pain into strength. Lucius felt a spark of anticipation. That is what I want to learn most, he said. Marcus nodded. Then tomorrow, he said, we will finish this journey. Lucius watched the people of the forum as the sun climbed higher into the sky. For the first time in his life, he felt as though pain was no longer something to fear. It was something to understand and maybe even something to use. The final morning felt different. Lucius noticed it the moment he stepped outside. The air seemed clearer, the sounds of the city softer, as though the world had not changed, but he had. For days he had walked the same streets, passed the same buildings, seen the same faces, but now, everything felt more vivid. The light seemed warmer. The movement of people felt more meaningful. Even the distant sound of hammering from the blacksmith store carried a strange sense of rhythm and purpose. He reached the temple bench where Marcus always sat. The old philosopher was already there, watching the sunrise. His posture was relaxed, his expression peaceful, as though he were in quiet conversation with the morning itself. Lucius sat beside him. You seem lighter today, Marcus said. Lucius nodded. I think I am. The pain in my arm is still there, but it doesn't bother me the same way. And the memory of my brother, it still hurts, but it feels different. Less like a wound, more like something I carry with me. Marcus smiled softly. That is the beginning of wisdom. Lucius took a deep breath. You said yesterday that today you would teach me the final lesson, how to turn pain into strength. Marcus nodded. Yes, because understanding pain is not enough. The Stoic does something more. He uses it. Lucius leaned forward. Uses it. Marcus stood up slowly and gestured for Lucius to walk with him. They moved through the forum, where the morning crowd had begun to gather. Merchants called out to customers. Children laughed, and the smell of fresh bread drifted through the air. Marcus stopped near the blacksmith stile, the same one they had passed on the first day. Inside, the blacksmith raised his hammer and brought it down hard against a glowing piece of metal. Sparks flew into the air, bright and brief like shooting stars. Clang, clang, clang. Marcus pointed toward the anvil. Do you remember what I told you about the sword? He asked. Lucius nodded. That it becomes strong through heat and force. Marcus smiled. Yes, but today, we go one step further. He gestured toward the glowing metal. Do you think the metal enjoys the fire? Lucius shook his head. Of course not. Do you think it wants to be struck by the hammer? No. Marcus nodded. And yet, without those things, it would never become a sword. Lucius watched the sparks rise and fade into the air. So pain shapes us, he said. Marcus raised a finger. Only if we let it. Lucius frowned. What do you mean? Marcus turned to face him. Pain is like fire. It can harden you into something strong, or it can reduce you to ash. The difference lies in your response. Lucius considered that. So some people become stronger through pain, he said, and others become bitter. Exactly, Marcus replied. Some people suffer and grow wiser, kinder, more resilient. Others suffer and grow angry, fearful, and cruel. Lucius nodded slowly. And the Stoic chooses the first path, he said. Marcus smiled. Yes, but it is a choice that must be made again and again. They stepped away from the blacksmith and into the open square. Marcus continued. Every hardship in your life gives you an opportunity. Not a comfortable opportunity, not an easy one, but a powerful one. Lucius listened closely. When you feel pain, Marcus said, you can ask yourself a simple question. What virtue is this asking of me? Lucius repeated the words quietly. What virtue is this asking of me? Marcus nodded. If you face fear, the moment calls for courage. If you face insult, it calls for patience. If you face loss, it calls for acceptance. If you face hardship, it calls for endurance. Lucius felt a spark of understanding. So every painful moment is a chance to practice a virtue. Exactly, Marcus said. And that is how pain becomes strength. They walked past the fountain where Lucius had spoken about his brother. Lucius stopped and looked at the water. When Titus died, he said, "What virtue was that moment asking of me?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. Then he said softly, "Acceptance, love without bitterness, gratitude for the time you had, instead of anger for the time you lost." Lucius nodded slowly. "I didn't choose that path," he admitted. Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder. "You can still choose it now." Lucius felt a quiet warmth in his chest. For the first time, he thought of his brother not as something stolen from him but as something he had been lucky to have at all. They continued walking. Marcus stopped near a group of young soldiers training in the square. They were sweating, breathing heavily, striking wooden dummies again and again. "Why do they train so hard?" Marcus asked. "To prepare for battle," Lucius said. Marcus nodded. "And what happens if a soldier refuses to train because it is painful?" "He will be weak," Lucius replied, "unprepared." Marcus smiled. "Life is the same. Every hardship is training. Every discomfort is practice." Lucius watched the soldiers. "So when life hurts me," he said, "it's not just happening to me, it's training me." Marcus nodded. "Yes, if you allow it to." Lucius thought about all the pain he had experienced, his injuries, his disappointments, his brother's death, his fears. For the first time, those memories didn't feel like meaningless suffering, they felt like lessons. "Then nothing is wasted," he said quietly. Marcus smiled. "Nothing, not even pain." They returned to the stone bench near the temple. The sun was high now, and the square was alive with movement. Lucius sat down, feeling a strange mixture of calm and strength. "So if I understand everything you've taught me," he said slowly, "pain itself is not the enemy." Marcus nodded. "It is my judgment that creates suffering," Lucius continued. "And if I face pain with the right mindset, it can make me stronger." Marcus smiled. "You have learned well." Lucius took a deep breath. "But there is one thing I still wonder," he said. "Will the pain ever disappear completely?" Marcus's expression grew gentle. "No," he said, "not entirely. As long as you live, you will feel pain, physical and emotional. That is part of being human." Lucius nodded. He had expected that answer. "But something else happens," Marcus continued. "As your mind grows stronger, pain loses its power over you." Lucius frowned slightly. "How?" Marcus pointed toward the temple steps, where an old man was climbing slowly, leaning on a cane. "That man likely feels more physical pain than either of us," Marcus said. "And yet, look at his face." Lucius observed him. The old man's expression was calm, almost peaceful. "He doesn't look miserable," Lucius said. Marcus nodded. "Because pain is no longer a shock to him. It is just a part of life, like the changing seasons." Lucius smiled faintly. "So the goal isn't to eliminate pain, but to become stronger than it." "Exactly," Marcus said. Lucius felt a quiet sense of confidence rise inside him. "And what happens when someone truly understands this?" he asked. Marcus's voice softened. "They become free." Lucius looked at him. "Free, yes," Marcus said, "because they are no longer controlled by fear of discomfort, loss, or hardship. They can act with courage, love deeply, but speak honestly, live fully." Lucius felt those words settle deep within him. Freedom, not from pain but from the fear of it. He looked around the forum. The noise, the movement, the unpredictability of life, it no longer felt threatening. It felt natural. Marcus stood up from the bench. "Our lessons are finished," he said. Lucius stood as well. "Will I see you again?" he asked. Marcus smiled. "Of course. But from now on, the real teacher will be life itself." Lucius nodded. "And what if I forget these lessons?" he asked. Marcus chuckled softly. "You will. Everyone does. But pain will remind you. It always does." Lucius smiled. For the first time, that thought didn't frighten him. Marcus began to walk away, disappearing into the crowd. Lucius stood alone in the square, feeling the sun on his face and the steady rhythm of life around him. He flexed his injured arm. The ache was still there, but it felt small, almost insignificant. He thought of his brother, and instead of sadness alone, he felt gratitude. He thought of the hardships ahead, and instead of fear, he felt readiness. He whispered quietly to himself, "Pain is not my enemy. It is my teacher." And with that, he stepped into the busy streets of Rome, no longer running from pain, but walking forward, ready to be shaped by it.